Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a conversation today and a bit of a discussion about the various sports that are taking place over this weekend. We're going to touch on boxing first. We're going to talk a little bit about the football matches that are happening this weekend, both in the Premier League and also in the Carabao Cup Final. And we are also going to talk a little bit about the rugby, because that's a sort of pivotal day today for the Six Nations Championship as well. So starting off with the boxing, I think this is really exciting because we've got Nick Ball, who's fighting TJ Dehaney. Really interesting fight that is, although I can't really look past Nick Ball winning this one quite comfortably. I think anybody that's seen Nick in his last, however many fights he's had, 20 odd fights, will know that he's got the nickname Wrecking Ball for a reason. He really is a sort of pint-sized version of Mike Tyson, who wasn't super tall himself, obviously, but again, Nick Ball sort of coming in at a height around sort of 5'4", and he's often had to go up against opponents that are much taller than him, and he's had some really good wins, most recently coming off the back of that fantastic victory over Rios. Has been involved in a bit of a controversial draw before that, so this is a real opportunity for Nick to sort of stake his claim as the absolute main contender in the division, and the Japanese lad Inui is in line to potentially fight the winner of this. So it's a huge night for Nick in his home city of Liverpool. So the crowd, it will be a partisan crowd, there's no two ways about that. It's really hard to imagine that that energy won't help Nick get over the line. Not that he'll probably need much support because he's a ferocious fighter. So, and the undercard looks decent. You know, it's not necessarily stacked with sort of big names, but there's a lot of sort of local Liverpool fighters in there as well. And sort of Callum Smith came out recently and talked about the importance of trying to kind of grow fighting in Liverpool. So I think this opportunity for Nick to sort of have a really big night in his home city is going to be great. So boxing should be really good this weekend, and really looking forward to that fight tonight. I think the beauty of that as well is it's also free to air for those that have got a TNT Sports subscription, so really good on that, and plenty of fighting to watch. I think it all starts from about sort of 5-6 o'clock tonight, and it should be a really good undercard. Lots of sort of quite lightweight fighters as well, so you usually get sort of fast paced and lots of punches thrown per round as well. So yeah, I'm personally really looking forward to this one, but like I said, I can't see past Nick Ball. I think he's absolutely got that one in the bag. Onto the football that's taking place this weekend. I think if we look at the games that are happening today, first up you've got Everton against West Ham, which a lot of people are calling the Moyes Derby. So really interesting one. It's a miraculous performance that Moyes has had since coming in to take over at Everton again, and obviously he did a wonderful job at West Ham, and it sort of just fizzled out a little bit towards the end. I think a lot of the fans obviously got a bit disappointed with the style of football that was on display. So but Everton were in need of a big change, and Sean Dyche did a good job, and I think Moyes has been sort of very complimentary in coming out and talking about the fantastic job that Dyche did, but sort of laying the foundations, and Moyes has just got them scoring, and I think that's the big difference. He's obviously sort of kept it tight at the back, some really good sort of Premier League experience at the back. And then he's got Beto scoring, who's been really hit and miss throughout the season. Got his opportunity because, of course, Calvert-Lewin got injured, which he so often does throughout the season, unfortunately for him. But he gives people an opportunity, and I think it's the way West Ham played against Newcastle on Monday last week was quite disappointing. And I think there's flashes of improvements in the style under Potter, but I don't think it's we're going to sort of see the full Potter style of football until probably next season. I think there's still a number of players in the team, not bad players, but players that probably don't necessarily fit into his style of play. So I'm expecting, and I would predict that it's probably going to be either a draw or an Everton win, especially where Everton are at home as well, and it's their last season at Goodison Park. So I think there'll be some pictures on the Liverpool Echo of David Moyes celebrating against his old club. So that's my predictions on the first one. For the second game, another 3:00 kickoff was Ipswich against Nottingham Forest. So I think this will be tighter than a lot of people think. I think Forest have obviously had an unbelievable season, but I think Ipswich have been decent in parts as well. So particularly helped by Liam Delap, who's just been scoring an incredible number of goals for a team that's so low down the table and getting so few chances per game as well. So I think potentially this one could be, again, a little bit tighter than people think. I think probably the bookies would make Nottingham Forest the absolute odds-on favourites, but I could see Ipswich potentially pulling something off here. So I'm going to probably call this one as a 2-2 draw. I think it'd be fairly high scoring, and I think that would be a great result for Ipswich. Not so great for Nottingham Forest in their pursuit of Champions League this year. Then we've got a really exciting game. Another 3:00 kickoff is Man City against Brighton. So Brighton have obviously been on an unbelievable run recently, but then at the same time Guardiola seems to have sort of, at least domestically anyway, steadied the ship at City. So City are at home, but Brighton have been on a great run, playing some really fluid football. I think there's a lot of respect between the two managers. Guardiola's talking quite a lot about the Brighton manager and what a great job he's done. So I think this one is probably going to be a Man City win, but I think Brighton will play them off the park for parts of the game, which doesn't often happen at City, although more often in recent times. And then the final 3:00 kickoff today is Southampton against Wolves. It's almost impossible to think of Southampton winning any games really between now and the end of the season. I just don't think they've got enough quality in the squad, and Wolves have got one standout star in Cunha. They've also got plenty of other sort of decent attacking talent as well. So I think this will probably be a win for Wolves, probably a fairly comfortable one. Although Southampton will be sort of focused on kind of keeping spirits high and morale in the dressing room. They did spend quite a bit in the summer, but I think probably a lot of those players would be more at home in the Championship. So I think they'll probably keep a lot of those players next season. So it's about kind of maintaining that sort of harmony amongst the team and trying to sort of stabilise and make sure that when they go down next season, and I think it really is a case of when and not if, then they'll be in a position to sort of bounce back straight away. So that's what I think will happen in that game. And then the final game today is Bournemouth against Brentford. So again, Bournemouth have played some unbelievably good football this year. Brentford have been decent as well. Obviously, Brentford have got such a goal threat in Mbueno and Johan Wissa up front as well. So you really can't count them out scoring goals, Brentford. But Bournemouth have just been unbelievable and probably one of the best teams to watch this season, maybe anywhere in Europe. Just such an exciting brand of football under Iraola, who didn't have the greatest start to his time at Bournemouth. Obviously, budget's very minimal. I do think with Bournemouth this year, I think what will probably end up happening is they'll end up with losing quite a lot of players. I think we saw that sort of when Southampton a few years ago, quite a long time ago actually. But if you're talking about sort of the team that was around Adam Lallana, even the Brighton team as well, going back to Potter, sort of Caicedo and Cucurella. Those players sort of getting pinched and taken to the big four. I think that's what will probably happen with Bournemouth, particularly sort of players like Kluivert and Semenyo. I think they've just had a fantastic season, but I think they're going to struggle to keep hold of those players next year. So I think they'll absolutely win today. I think Brentford will score. I think one of those two that I named earlier are probably the sort of most likely goal threat. But I would say this is probably going to be a 2-1, maybe 3-1 victory for Bournemouth. There is more football taking place in the Championship. So I was at Fratton Park on what night was it? Wednesday night to watch Portsmouth against Plymouth. So Plymouth's first away victory for a ridiculous amount of time. I think it was their longest streak without winning an away game for something like 41 years. So there was I have to say the Plymouth fans were unbelievable. There was only about 1,400 of them at Fratton Park on Wednesday, and they made an unbelievable noise. So it was an interesting game. I think Portsmouth just sort of dominated for the first sort of half an hour or so, and then Plymouth just sort of nicked a goal on the break, and then sort of broke hearts really with a goal so quick into the second half. But It was an exciting finish. There was the most amount of time added on that I've ever seen in the Championship, to be honest. I think we had 11 or 12 minutes in the end, a red card and a number of injuries for Plymouth. But Portsmouth are up against Preston today, and I feel like Portsmouth, it's their season really, where they seem to be losing against the sort of not so great teams and then beating the top of the table, which is what happened. So they lost to Luton, then beat Leeds, and then lost to Plymouth. It's just been one of those inconsistent seasons. But then at the same time, for Pompey, it's the key goal this season is to sort of maintain Championship status, and I think they'll certainly do that. Some other interesting games as well in the Championship. So Coventry City, who were on a fantastic run under Lampard. I think he's really resurrected his managerial career, done a great job, to be honest, at Coventry, and he's up against Sunderland. So I think that would be a really interesting one to watch. I think Plymouth could be an interesting game against Derby. They'll be absolutely on a high after their win at Fratton Park on Wednesday. So I feel like they've got a real good chance of turning over Derby there as well. And there's a few other games on as well that are sort of well worth a watch. Sort of sticking on football, I think there's a couple of other sort of main topics to discuss. So you've got the Carabao Cup Final on Sunday, tomorrow, which is really interesting because I was reading earlier that Newcastle haven't won a domestic trophy since 1955, and their last actual trophy was the Interfairs Cup in 1969. So for a club, and I know this is such a cliche, but for a club the size of Newcastle, and I have had the pleasure of going to Newcastle. I've not been to a match at St James's Park, but I've been in and around St James's Park on a number of occasions. It's like a cathedral in the middle of the city, and it's such an unbelievably well supported club. So and they sort of pack out the stands week in, week out. Their away fans are fantastic. So obviously they've had sort of significant turn in fortune since the ownership under the Saudis, and this feels like a real pivotal moment, I think, for Eddie Howe. And I think if Eddie Howe can sort of win this tomorrow, and I think he's done a fantastic job at Newcastle, but so often what we see, if we think back to Man City when they were first taken over by Sheikh Mansour and they had Mark Hughes in charge, I think you do often see that there's a tendency by some of the tycoons to sort of want to bring in a star-studded manager, and I think Eddie Howe has made it impossible for them to even consider that because he's just done such a good job. Obviously Newcastle getting into the Champions League and the first season under that ownership, and this year's another really good year for them. Isaac obviously scoring a phenomenal number of goals, looking literally like he could become a Premier League legend if he stays in the league. Hopefully Newcastle can keep hold of him, but that's next season. Talking about the game tomorrow, tough ask obviously against Liverpool, but then I didn't think they were fantastic on Tuesday night in the Champions League. I thought it's difficult to say that because I thought PSG, particularly in the first game, gave one of the best performances that I've probably seen in the Champions League, and obviously equally Alisson also gave one of the best performances, probably the best performance I've ever seen in the Champions League from a goalkeeper. So it was really unfortunate for PSG not to win that game, and I thought over the two legs they absolutely deserved to win. So, and nobody's come even close to doing that to Liverpool this season. So if there's a blueprint for how to beat Liverpool, although that seems a bit sort of counterintuitive to say that given the fact that PSG lost the first game and obviously only sort of narrowly beat Liverpool in the leg at Anfield. I do think that potentially there's something there for Newcastle to have a look at. So maybe Eddie Howe's going to sort of try and mirror some of the tactics that are on display for Luis Enrique. But yeah, I feel like this is one of those where I think Newcastle could win it, and I think it would obviously be really demoralising for Liverpool. But how often do we see that sort of thing happening where a team has a phenomenal season and then they sort of lose a number of really key games in succession? They're obviously going to win the title this year. I don't think anybody seriously thinks that anybody else is going to take the title from them this season. They're absolutely well clear at the top of the table. But I just feel like, losing in the Champions League, demotivating, demoralising. I think it was obviously a really hard moment for some of the players. Alexander-Arnold, Virgil van Dijk, Salah, they were all very emotional after the game, and I think that's probably because we're unlikely to see those guys in a shirt, a Liverpool shirt in the Champions League again. So how quickly can they bounce back? I think Virgil van Dijk talked about this in the interview that he gave post-match as well, and said something along the lines of that there's no better sort of thing for us to do, because the game that comes after this, and there was a sort of conversation in punditry to say as well, I think Clarence Seedorf was saying as well, that they're in a position where they don't need to get up for this. It's not like they've got a sort of no disrespect to Ipswich or Southampton or the teams towards the bottom of the table, but it's not like they've got to try and get themselves up for that game this weekend. They've got another final to go into, and obviously means an awful lot. But yeah, I feel like Newcastle are going to win this. I think Isak is probably going to outperform Salah, and I think really across the rest of the team, I think it'll be quite an even game. But I just think in terms of the sort of goal scorers, Salah had, in my opinion, two fairly poor games in the Champions League against PSG. Obviously, again, had a fantastic season and been such a pivotal player for them, but yeah, I think in terms of a battle of the two goal scorers, I think Isak's going to come out on top, and I think that'll be enough for Newcastle to win. In terms of other sort of Premier League games as well that are happening this weekend, so we've got some fantastic ones tomorrow. There's three great games really. So Arsenal against Chelsea is the sort of most significant fixture to look out for tomorrow. Hard to know how that one's going to go, because I think Chelsea have started playing much better recently. Arsenal have obviously had, like so many teams this season, really had lots of injuries and lots of key players out as well, which has made a sort of big difference to them. But I feel like this one will probably be a draw. I think if I had to be sort of had a gun to my head and I had to lean towards a win, it would probably be Arsenal. But then I just think with that lack of goal scoring threat up front, I feel like they're going to struggle to score lots of goals, and I feel like Chelsea will probably score one against them. So I think this one will probably be a 1-1. Fulham-Tottenham's a really interesting one, because I think historically you wouldn't have necessarily looked at that fixture and said, wow, this is going to be a great game, but I just feel like it's going to be a really open game. Marco Silva has done an amazing job at Fulham. Obviously had a bit of a tough time earlier in his Premier League managerial career, and I think was sort of criticised for playing in a kind of good, exciting brand of football, but one that leaked a lot of goals, and it I don't know, it probably needed a lot of fine tuning. Well, it's hard to say that he hasn't done that at Fulham. And obviously Tottenham, again, sort of probably a little bit like I was just describing with Marco Silva earlier in his career, where under Ange, Tottenham seem to be very exciting going forward. Again, another team that have had a phenomenal number of injuries, particularly at the back. I think that's been the sort of most damaging for them, because they've lost most of their first choice defenders, and I think a lot of people have come out and said, we support Ange on this, because any other side that was going to lose its entire back four for a significant part of the season is going to struggle. And you certainly see that. Tottenham are great going forward, scoring lots of goals, but at the back, very leaky, very sloppy mistakes, and I just don't think they dominate the midfield either. So I feel like this one's going to be a real high scoring affair. I think Fulham will probably come out on top. I just think there's a lot of pressure building on Ange. I really like him. I think he talks really well. I think he's got a really interesting and innovative style of football that he's brought to the Premier League. I thought his Celtic team was so exciting to watch as well. So I really hope he stays, but we know with Daniel Levy, he doesn't really sort of have a huge amount of patience, and certainly in recent years anyway, he's been quite quick to sort of dismiss managers. But I feel like Ange has probably had longer than most people think, so maybe there's a really good relationship there behind the scenes, and perhaps Levy can see that there's an exciting brand of football there, and there's a manager that sort of a lot of people sort of warm to. So yeah, hopefully, personally from my point of view, I'd like to see Ange stay. And I think he'll probably bring success to Tottenham over time, but probably needs a season without as many injuries as they've had, and also probably a decent transfer window to bring in a few more decent players. Certainly in terms of depth, I think if that's one thing they've learnt this year, it's that they didn't have enough depth. And then finally, you've got Leicester against Man United. So Man United had a great game on Thursday night in the Europa League. Really good performance. I thought Real Sociedad were really poor in the first leg. I didn't actually watch the second game, but I saw the result and probably didn't really surprise me because I just thought they didn't offer a huge amount going forward. They got a couple of sort of decent Spanish internationals, Real Sociedad, but yeah, I think the general consensus was that it was a team that Man United should have beaten. It's much like probably what the general thought process is around this game against Leicester. So, but again, it's Manchester United have had such an unstable, inconsistent season this year. I think without Bruno Fernandes, I mean, you dare you say it might have even been sort of close to relegation. I have no idea how many points he's won them this year, but it's just a phenomenal number of goals that he scored, and sort of such big goals. I was reading something on Reddit the other day where I don't know why it came up because I don't follow Man United, but there was talk in there about Man United, about Bruno Fernandes being considered a Man United legend, and I just thought that was interesting because and the general consensus was that he might be the first legend since the Fergie era. They've had obviously a number of sort of good players, but nobody that's probably performed as consistently as he has. And I saw a post as well about the number of goals and assists he's had in the last, I think it's 5 or 6 years, or it might even be about 6 years since he's been at Man United, and he's just been so consistent, sort of 10 to 15 assists, 10 to 15 goals every season. There was that one season where he had over 20, I think probably on his second or third season at United. So yeah, but yeah, Leicester, certainly don't count them out, but I think Man United will probably find a way to win this one. But it wouldn't shock me if Leicester won at home, because that's the sort of season Man United have had really, and the position, the table doesn't lie, certainly not at this stage of the season anyway. And then the final bit, just moving on from football. No, I'm not going to move on from football just yet, actually, because there is something else significant that's happened this week. So I think it was yesterday that Thomas Tuchel's first England squad was announced. So this certainly raised some controversy, although I was watching the interview with Thomas Tuchel, or press conference, and he kind of said, well, I'd be very surprised if there wasn't controversy, and I can totally understand his point of view. I think when you've got a 25-man or a 26-man or a 30-man squad to pick, there's always going to be people coming out and saying, well, why have you picked him and you should have picked him instead? So what I will say is that there was a lot of talk about some of the players that missed out, particularly the younger players. But if you haven't had a look at the England under-21 side that's just been announced, then you really should. So a lot of those missing faces that people were expecting, people like Jared Branthwaite and Nwaneri, trying to think who else. I think Elliot Anderson might be in the team as well. I'm not 100%. Adam Wharton was another one that people were calling forward, expecting to play. Those guys have found their way into the under-21s, and just go and have a look at that team. It's so good. I think there was a lot of talk on Reddit, particularly about whether that team would be able to sort of potentially cause some problems for the England first team or the senior team. And I think, you'd certainly see a very interesting match because, just such quality and depth across the entire team there, and lots of Premier League experience. And I think if we think back to a few years ago where there was lots of talk about Premier League players, particularly sort of under 21s, not getting enough first team games in the league, that seems to have changed now, and I don't know if that's. I think that's probably just with the improvement in quality. But lots of those players in the under-21s are playing week in, week out, so that's so exciting. And I think with the World Cup coming up next year, so gives the guys an opportunity to sort of get some tournament experience. There's an under-21 Euros taking place in the summer this year, so it'd be really hard to imagine that they're not going to sort of do very well in that. If you look at that squad, it's phenomenal. Obviously France are sort of similarly capable of producing phenomenal under-21 teams as well, just the depth of talent that they've got at their disposal. And Spain and Germany are sort of able to do that as well, and even Italy to an extent, and Portugal, and obviously there's plenty of other teams. Netherlands do that as well. But I just think if you look at that team, the only sort of probably slightly weaker area is at the back. But even then, you've got players like Taylor Harwood-Bellis, who's playing week in, week out for Southampton. So yeah, I'd be surprised if they don't do really well this year. So I can understand the decision from Tuchel. I think lots of scratching heads about Jordan Henderson's inclusion in the squad. I think if you listen to Tuchel talk about it, I think you can understand the reason why he's done that. Some people calling it babysitting duties. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think I can understand that. If you're a new manager coming in, Gareth was in charge for so long, and one of the things that Gareth can never be criticised for was for building a phenomenal team mentality and a great sort of bunch of lads, and the way that they sort of interacted and worked for each other. So for Tuchel coming in, he's got to create that, and I think it's one of the kind of helpful ways of transitioning into a new manager and a new style and new approach for the players is probably to bring some of those more experienced and older pros who can sort of continue some of the good work that Gareth was doing as well. And I think you've got people like Harry Kane in there, and I think Jordan Henderson is certainly an example of that. Even Marcus Rashford to an extent. Does he really deserve a call up after, I think, he's got 4 assists for Villa since he made his loan move in January. How many players have we seen leave Man United and sort of look a lot better? But probably didn't necessarily deserve a recall for me. There's probably other players that maybe deserved a shout. I think there was also a bit of questioning around Reece James's inclusion. I don't think anyone thinks that Reece James isn't a good enough footballer to play for England. I just think the inconsistency with injuries over a long time has obviously really hampered him, and it makes him such a risk taking him to a tournament, because he unfortunately, so unfortunate for him, because I think he's a fantastic right back, but you just feel like what a risk that would be, taking him to a tournament, because he gets injured. But then I don't know, it's all about depth, isn't it? Alexander-Arnold's probably going to play week in, week out, but I think a lot of people felt that maybe somebody like Aaron Wan-Bissaka probably deserved a shout. I think he's had a fantastic season for West Ham, so performed really well in a sort of not so great team. Liam Delap as well. Obviously, he's, I think, 22 now as well, so I think he's been included in the under-21s, but you could argue that he's probably as able a deputy as anybody else. I was reading the report saying that Tuchel was going out to Saudi Arabia to watch Ivan Toney. I think personally that ship sailed. I think a lot of people felt that as soon as Tony made the decision to leave the Premier League and join Saudi. And he didn't have a fantastic end of the season at Brighton as well. It wasn't bad, but obviously that ban took him out for a long time as well. And I think prior to that he was definitely in with a shout. But Ollie Watkins has scored a lot this season. I think it was a big vote of confidence as well from Unai Emery to sell Duran, who a lot of people thought was perhaps more worthy of a start than Watkins this season, but despite the sort of significant difference in age as well and profile, Emery, who deserves an unbelievable amount of plaudits for his phenomenal turnaround in Villa's fortunes and stature of that club. He picked Watkins, so I've got no question about Watkins being the first deputy for Harry Kane. But I think he's only had one really obviously strong season at Ipswich. But if he sort of makes the move to another club, another Premier League club in the summer, and he has another good season, Liam Delap, I can see him sort of potentially staking a claim as the deputy to Harry Kane. I don't think anyone's going to oust Harry Kane until he's ready to retire. He's had another phenomenal season at Bayern, scored again in the Champions League, was sort of instrumental in their victories over Leverkusen, which was a significant moment for Bayern, obviously, as well, because they lost the title to them last year and even struggled to sort of beat them. I think just sort of the general consensus was that they nicked a 0-0 or a draw earlier in the season, and there was a lot of criticism of Company for that. But going off on a tangent a bit there, Harry Kane's absolutely nailed on to start, and so he should, because he's just been probably one of England's greatest players of all time, even at this stage. And I know people will criticise me for that, and they'll say that he couldn't be considered or shouldn't be considered that until he's won something. But he's come about as close as anybody else ever has, other than obviously that team in the '66 World Cup. So that's sort of the roundup. So from my point of view, I think if I hadn't have seen the under-21 squad, I'd have probably felt like maybe Tuchel hadn't been brave enough in some of his decision making, but I'm guessing there's probably a sort of long-term approach there, which is, like I said, give the guys tournament football, get them experienced, get them playing regularly, because they're not going to start for England's senior squad. Some of them might come on off the bench, but is it perhaps better to have them playing 90 minutes over both those two games and than sort of perhaps playing 30 or 35 minutes or 40 minutes or something? And maybe that's a good decision. So we'll wait and see with Tuchel, I think, and sort of go from there. And then, finally, moving on to the rugby, which is taking place today. So a significant day for the Six Nations. There's all three games that are happening today. I think the first one's at 2:15, and then all the way up until the last one taking place at 8 o'clock with France. So I think this is interesting because England are obviously still in with a chance of winning the Six Nations, albeit a very slim one. I thought Scotland I think there's been quite a bit of criticism of Scotland not quite living up to their potential. They've played really well at moments throughout the Six Nations. I've watched pretty much all the games actually this year, so I think Scotland have been good, and obviously have got some standout stars. But yeah, it's a tough ask for them to try and beat France, and I don't want to be too disrespectful, but for anyone that's listening that's Scottish, I don't know if they'll be too keen to be doing England a favour. So I'm not suggesting for a second that they're going to roll over and let France win it just to stop England. But I'm not going to suggest it, but I'm sure other people out there would. But no, I think there's too much pride, and it's too important for them to finish well. So. But yeah, England against Wales taking place this afternoon, so that's going to be an interesting one because Wales have looked good at times, which is crazy to say because they haven't won a game in the Six Nations now for 2 years, which is baffling really. When I was growing up, Wales were such a dominant force in rugby and produced so many good players, and really it's not to say they haven't got good players, they've probably just not got enough great players other than the captain who's been head and shoulders above everybody else in that team in this tournament. But don't count them out because they've come really close to winning on a couple of occasions, sort of just missed out really, and perhaps, I don't know, a little bit of naivety, maybe losing the game towards the end, letting it get away from them. But England have not been too dissimilar. England have again sort of made some of the games harder than they should be. But then had some fantastic victories as well on the way. So I think England will beat Wales, but again I think it'll be reasonably close. I've got a feeling Wales will be in the game for probably at least an hour, and then I just think England will probably use the energy, maybe more depth as well, to come on in the sort of latter stages of the game, and I just feel England will probably nick one or two tries at the end and sort of make the scoreline perhaps look a little bit like less of a competitive game than the actual 80 minutes suggest they were for those that watched. So that's what I think is going to happen there. Ireland, Italy, no disrespect to Italy, who again have improved a lot in the time I've been watching the Six Nations. They were historically always the whipping boys of the Six Nations during my time of watching rugby when I was younger. But I think Ireland are going to have far too much for them, so I'm expecting Ireland to win that one, and I don't think anyone's really expecting an Italy victory on that. So. But the France-Scotland one's really interesting, so it wouldn't surprise me at all if Scotland do beat France because they have played really well and they've got a great team. But France have just been so good, they've just got so much talent in that team. And I didn't realise that. I think France has more. I think it's only South Africa has more registered rugby players than France, and obviously I knew the sport was big, but I think only in sort of recent years have I really started to appreciate how popular the sport is, particularly obviously the north of France, given their sort of prowess as a footballing nation. It's phenomenal to think that they're able to produce they are able to produce so many great quality rugby players as well. So yeah, I think if I'm being really honest, I think probably France will win against Scotland. I think England will probably beat Wales. I think Ireland will beat Italy. So I suspect that will probably mean that France win. Well, it would mean that France would win the Six Nations. But yeah, I don't know. All England can do today is win comfortably, get the bonus point, put themselves in contention, and then that does put pressure on France. They don't seem to be a team that would struggle under pressure. I don't necessarily think that that's what people would think about them. But it'd be interesting to see, wouldn't it? Because they'd have to obviously put in a really good performance, get the bonus point themselves, and win that as well. So all in all, in summary, I think for those of us that have got the luxury of being at home this weekend, or being able to sit in and tune in to some of the different sports that are taking place, we've got some great football matches today. There's some fantastic boxing this evening as well. So I'd highly recommend, if those of you that haven't watched Nick Ball before, watch him. He will very quickly probably become one of your favourite fighters. My fiance thinks Nick Ball's her favourite fighter, so we watch quite a lot of boxing together, sort of doing scorecards and things together. But yeah, she finds him the most exciting fighter to watch, and it was only sort of 2 or 3 years ago that she was a very casual boxing fan. So I would say definitely tune in for that one. Some great fixtures today, tomorrow. Obviously, the Carabao Cup Final as well is definitely one to watch tomorrow. But this afternoon, I would say that there's probably, if I'm being really honest, I would say there's probably more action in the rugby than there is in the football. So if you've got a choice, if you're not fortunate enough to have 2 screens, well, one with the rugby on, one with the football on, then unless it's your team playing today, if you're a bit of a neutral like I am, then I'll be tuning in for the rugby instead. But definitely keeping a close eye on the football as well, because there could be some interesting results across today as well, and tomorrow. Great to speak to you all. Thanks very much, and tune in next week for another sort of rundown of some of the key sporting events coming up.